Welcome back, world. My name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and we are getting close to the end of this playlist, at least for now. I'm not going to tell you how many videos are left, though. I want to keep you guys guessing. But this video is going to be the Crashlytics video. People, let me tell you about your best friend, and it's Firebase Crashlytics. This is what we use so that when users crash in real time, we can get a report that says, this is the user that crashed, this is exactly where it crashed in our app, and this is the line of code exactly where that crash is happening. So that's what we're gonna set up in this video. We're gonna do a couple extra steps as well. So we're gonna look into how we can kind of customize these crash reports. We can add in some like custom logging, we can add in user IDs, we can even send our own custom crashes to the console so that we can just manage everything happening in our app at once. And some of you more experienced engineers are probably wondering what we're gonna do about the dSYMS in this video. I'll talk more about what they are in the actual video, but we're going to both automatically upload dSYMS and also learn how to manually upload dSYMS if we have to. So that will help you if you need to like backfill, maybe you forgot to do it for a previous release. All right, so again, this is your new best friend. Get super comfortable with Crashlytics because you're probably going to be using them in every app going forward. I definitely do, and it has saved every developer countless times. So without further ado, let's get coding.
All right, welcome back everybody. My name is Nick. Yes, of course, this is Swiftful Thinking, and today we're gonna look at Firebase Crashlytics. I am super hyped about this because we have now officially gotten through the hardest part of this course. So if you're following along, we've covered the Firestore database and storage and authentication, and those are by far the most difficult and complex of the Firebase products, at least in my opinion. And so now we're gonna go through a bunch of the other products in the Firebase console that are maybe not as core to your application, but they're just as important and just as popular, if not more popular, than some of the ones we've gone through. So for example, we're going to go through a Crashlytics here today. And Crashlytics is probably the most popular of all of the Firebase products because even if you're not using Firebase for your backend, if you're not using Firebase for your authentication, a lot of apps will still use Firebase for Crashlytics, because the Crashlytics is super powerful and any app in production should have some sort of crash logging metric. Now, there are other services out there that do offer crash reporting, but I think Firebase is by far the most common of them. And also, I think a lot of the other ones are paid or more expensive than the Firebase Crashlytics. So this one basically comes free when you create a Firebase account. All right. And so again, if you're just joining, we have already set up a Xcode project and we've connected Firebase to that project. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. If you don't know how to do that, check out our earlier video on this playlist. All right, so we're here in the Crashlytics tab of the Firebase console, and we're gonna go ahead and click Add SDK. I'm also gonna recommend that you guys should watch the intro video if you don't know what Crashlytics are. Basically just simple crash reporting. So if a user in your app crashes, you get a log that basically explains the crash, and then you can go and debug your code. We're gonna click Add SDK, and it's gonna bring us to Google's Docs. So again, if you don't have the Firebase SDK connected to your Xcode project, you gotta go ahead and do that. We've done that in an earlier video. And we're just gonna come down here, it says add the Crashlytics library. So we have not done that yet. Let's jump back into our Xcode project. We're gonna go to the project navigator. We're gonna go to the general tab, scroll on down, and in our frameworks libraries, we're going to type in Crashlytics and it pops right up here. Let's go ahead and add it to our project. All right, going back to the annotation here, import Firebase, configure Firebase, and that's pretty much all it is to actually get it set up in code. We already are configuring Firebase for all of the other products that we are using. And then step 2, it says set up Xcode to automatically upload to dSYM files. And so if you've never done any kind of crash reporting or crash logging before, you might be a little thrown off about what dSYM means. That means debug symbols is what it stands for. And basically services like Firebase will use these symbols as sort of an intermediary between the crash log and the crash report that we're going to get. And it's going to use these symbols to basically figure out where the crash is and give us an actual function name of where the crash is happening. And so without the dSYMS, the Firebase console basically would have no idea what the crashes are. It would just be some sort of generic log and it wouldn't know how to understand what they are. So we do need to upload dSYMS in order to get the crash logs. So we're going to follow exactly what it says right here. So we're going to go to the Xcode project. We're going to go to the target and we're going to go to build settings. So let's do that quick. We're in Xcode. I'm going to come up here. This is my target for my app. So if you have multiple targets, I think you have to do this on every target. And then it says go to build, what did it say? Build phases, build settings. Let's go to build settings. And it says click all and then search debug information format. Let's go ahead and do that. You go to all here and debug information format. And I think it just wants us to set dwarf with dSYM for all build types. So right now we have dwarf with dSYM on the release build, but not on debug. Let's also put it on debug. So this way, when we are just developing and not actually in production, we still get those crash logs sending to Crashlytics. All right, then it says go to the build phases tab, click plus and run new script phase. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to the build phases tab. We're going to click the plus and run new script phase. The run script you'll notice here comes in at the bottom. And there's a quick comment here that says, make sure that this run script is the last build phase in your project. So that basically just means, I think, at the bottom here. So if you're going to end up adding more in the future, I believe you can just like rearrange these. And I think we want this to make sure that this is at the bottom. All right, in the script field located under shell, add this. So let's copy this and go here. We have the shell and then we have the script field. And paste that in right there like that. Let's go back. In the input files section, add paths for the following locations. So let's add this one. Go back into Xcode. So I think we got to go here to input files. Let's delete that and add in what it told us to add. And let's do it for the other one as well. I'm going to copy this one. Go back into Xcode. Let's add another. Click enter, and there we go. All right. If you have Bitcode enabled, you can manually download dSYMS. What does this give us? Oh, how to manually. I don't think you can actually do this from the App Store anymore, so I'm not going to go through that. And then it says, let's force test a crash to finish setup. And that was it. That was the whole setup, and I think it will work now. So let's actually test this out. Let's go into our Xcode project and try to force a crash. And so now that we have our dwarf with dSYM on in debug and we have this run script, I believe it's going to send the dSYMS as soon as we build and run our application to a simulator. So let's go ahead and open up a simulator. Let's build and run our app for a second. And while that is building, let's actually create a file so that we can simulate a crash. Unlike the previous videos in this course, where all the videos have been adding on to the same project, we're going to now shift gears and actually just start a new file for every project, just to keep it simple because we don't need to write tons of code here. So let's right click the navigator, create a new group, and I'm going to call this one Crashlytics. I'm going to move it down to underneath the storage section here. Right click, new file, and let's create a SwiftUI view so that we can crash it. I'm going to call this crash view. Why not? All right, so let's click create. All right. And so let's see what we're going to do here. Let's keep our screen super simple, guys. I'm going to create let's do a Z stack. Open the brackets here. I'm going to do color.red.ignores safe area just so that we have a little bit of a background. I'm going to do color.maybe gray ignore safe area just so that we have a background. And then I'm going to add a V stack and let's go ahead and add some crashes. So I'm going to add a button here. This one says click me one and let's force a crash. So let's make maybe an optional. We'll say let my string of type optional string equals nil. And then we'll say let string 2 equals my string, and we'll force unwrap it knowing that it's nil. That should crash our app. Let's try another one here. Click me 2. And this time let's just do a fatal error. Give it a message. This was a fatal crash. And let's do one more, maybe another button here that says, maybe another fake crash here. We'll say let array of type, maybe an array of string. Make it a blank array, and then we will access the item at the array at index 0, which we know there is nothing, and that should crash our app as well. Click me 3. All right, before we run this, let's actually open up the scheme here. Let's go to edit scheme and arguments passed on launch. So if I look at if I look at the documentation for Crashlytics, and in number 4, it says go to the console, and it also says if you're not seeing the test crash, you can enable debug logging. And so debug logging is basically we go to the edit scheme, we add fire debug enabled. So I'm going to go to Xcode here and arguments passed on launch. We're going to add fire debug enabled. One really annoying thing, if you've never used this before, is that when we do this, we're going to start getting a ton of printouts to the console, and they can get very annoying. So eventually you want to turn this off, but unchecking it is actually not going to turn it off. In order to turn it off, you actually need to enable another argument, which is fire debug disabled. So we're going to just add this one here for you guys later. So I'm just going to uncheck that, keep this one checked. So unchecking this is not going to be enough. We actually have to uncheck this and enable this to turn it off. All right, close. Let's Command-Shift-K to clean and rebuild. I'm going to run the app to a simulator, and let's try to actually crash the app now. All right. And while I'm waiting for it to build, I just want to show you guys, I Googled on Stack Overflow what are dSYMS basically, and what's a dSYM, how to use it. This is a really great example here. So this is someone uploading. So this is what the crash log normally looks like without the dSYMS. And then after you upload the dSYMS, it looks much more like this. And so here we can actually read what these are rather than just memory addresses, right? So we can, this is obviously someone else's app, but you would be able to tell, where the actual crash is happening, what is the actual chain of events that is causing the crash. This is basically what we're going to see when we get into the Firebase console, this version of it. Because if we just had this version, we really wouldn't even know where to start. All right, so my app is launching now, and we're going to follow those steps that the Firebase documentation told us we have to do. Oh, that's not a very good UI. Let's make this VStack spacing of 40. Let's make this gray, maybe opacity 0.3. All right. And so the Firebase docs told us that we have to first stop running the app from Xcode, then crash, and then relaunch the app from Xcode. So that's basically what we're going to do now. All right. And so we're going to follow the Firebase documentation of exactly what we want to do. So here I have the app and it's connected to Xcode. What we're going to do is stop running the app. So it disconnects from Xcode. It's going to shut down the app. Then we're going to open it manually here and actually cause some of these crashes. And let's do a whole bunch so that we can see some different crashes in the console. So I'm going to do maybe each of these twice. And then since we have the debug enabled, when we go and run this through Xcode again, I think we're going to get a printout here. Let's see. Well, a lot of stuff printed out. All right. So yeah, so here, Firebase Bootcamp, these are the analytics. Let's look for Crashlytics. So there's some default analytics that come into Firebase when you install it. And that's why those analytics are going off. But we're going to look for the Crashlytics. What is this one? Root. Okay. Automatic data collection is enabled. And I think this is it right here. So it says packaged with report with ID of this number for submission. I think what that means is that it uploaded a crash to the Firebase console. So let's go back to the console and check it out now. I'm going to open up my Firebase console. I'm going to reload the Crashlytics tab and boom, And we got some crashes coming through here, which is awesome. I am going to just point out here, because these look kind of weird. Normally, the crashes look much closer to this one here, where we can actually kind of read what's going on and it gives us some data, rather than this one. I think these crashes are maybe just because our sample app right now is so small that it's registering as like the root of the app. So let's look at this one, because this is much more realistic of what's going to happen in our projects. So we're going to open this up here. And this is literally all the data that we have for the crash. And so we can come down here, we can see the first tab here is basically a convenience for us as the developer. Firebase has gone ahead and hid all of the unimportant stuff in the crash log and tried to highlight exactly what we would want, which is exactly this line. So if this was our app, we would know that on crash view on line 28. So I come here and I go to crash view line 28. Is crashing, and that's literally exactly where our crash was. So it's a pinpoint of where it's happening in your app. Now there are some crashes that are going to come through your app in production that are going to be tough to pinpoint. It's not always this simple, but you at least get the whole crash log here. So if you need to see like what was happening before this, you can see it by opening up the rest of the crash log. We can also switch to the TXT tab, which is the raw crash log, not formatted nicely for us. And so this is the whole thing here. I can go ahead and download this. So if you're trying to send this to somebody else, or maybe you're in the Apple developer forums and they ask for a full crash log, this is what it would look like. And so this is a actual crash log that we see here. And the way to read this, so every thread that's running your app is going to have some data, and most of them are not going to be relevant to your crash. What we look for primarily is the reason that it crashed, which is usually up here at the top. And then this is the stack trace of the crash. And it's actually in chronological order, with this part up here being the closest to the crash, and this part down here being before the crash. And so this is everything that is happening on the same thread. So this stack trace, all 43 of these are happening on the main thread. And so we can see down here, the app launched, and then some other stuff happened. App main was called, some other stuff happened. And then up here, we got to the actual crash. So you can use this to try to get a trail of the crash as well, if you're unsure exactly where this crash is. It's interesting here, right, that we can see that the app actually launches Swift UI, but also obviously some UI kit under the hood, and then some more Swift UI on top, which is pretty interesting. If you're running a multi-threaded environment, you get all of the threads that are running out here. So one thread is working for the Firebase worker, it looks like. We got some system threads here, a whole bunch of good stuff. But yeah, most cases, the crash that you need is going to be right here, and it will tell you exactly what you need. We can see some other data here. So how many crashes happen, of course, is going to be on this. And we can change this graph to the last like 90 days if we want to. It's also going to tell us by device and by operating system and background device state of where your crash is happening. And these are really important when you get some tricky ones, because there are definitely crashes that are device specific or operating system specific. So if you come in here and you get, 200 crashes and they're all on iOS 14 and 0 are on iOS 16, then you need to replicate that crash by using an iOS 14 environment, right? So these are pretty important to check. This is like one of the first things that you should check when you get a crash. Same thing with devices. There are some crashes that might happen on smaller devices. There are some crashes that only happen on iPads. So all different use cases to use these. And then of course, background. Most of your crashes, I would assume, are going to be in the foreground, not in the background, and not on jailbroken phones, but it's also something to check out. There are some crashes if users have basically like no free space on their phone, that might be something. And then if you have a bunch of crashes and you want to go through them, you can click this little arrow here, and it's going to give you all of the crashes that are this crash. So right now there are 2 crashes that are this crash. If I had 100 of them, they would all be right here, and I could click through pretty quickly. The nice thing here is that you can see high level, what build version are they on, what iOS are they, what operating system are they on, what device are they running, and when the crash happened. When the crash happened is also pretty important, because if you have like an analytics tool, you could go into the analytics and try to review that as well to figure out what were the 5 analytics before this time that caused the crash, and that might help you as well. Lastly, we can go into the keys here and we can get the basic keys that come with it. We can go into the logs, which we don't have any logs right now. And then there's data that just comes with the baked in crash. Now you're going to notice here that there is the device, the operating system, and some data on the crash, but there is no information about the user. So we right now do not know what user caused this crash, which is quite unfortunate. Luckily, we can actually add that data and send that data to Crashlytics. And let's do that now. So we're going to go ahead and create a crash manager. Let's create a final class, call it crash manager. Open the brackets. Let's make a singleton like we've been doing all playlist. Static, let shared, and set it equal to a crash manager. Let's make a private init, open close brackets, and let's make a function that is, set user ID. And we're going to have to import the Crashlytics, Firebase Crashlytics SDK. And very simply, we can call Crashlytics.set user ID. It's literally exactly what we want. We'll pass in a user ID of type string, and we will set it. That's simple, right, guys? All right, let's on up here. Let's just set the user ID. So we're going to call a crash manager shared set user ID. Now, I don't really have one in the app right now, so I'm just going to use ABC123. Let's go ahead and build the app to the simulator one more time. This is a good idea. As soon as you get a user ID, I would set the user ID to Crashlytics. So if you're using authentication, as soon as you get them authenticated, throw it into Crashlytics, because it really does help to actually identify the user in the crash, especially if the users start to email in. Maybe you have some sort of reporting feature. A user might say, my app keeps crashing, and you might be able to get the user in your analytics, but you also want to then tie them to which crashes are happening to them. I'm going to stop running in the simulator. Let's open it up. Let's cause some more crashes. Boom, boom, boom. Let's do one of each. I think, well, the third one is the one that looks good in Crashlytics right now. Cool. Let's build it to the simulator one more time so that it uploads those crash logs. All right, we got in the simulator here that the crashes were uploaded in the console. So let's go to our console. Let's reload it real quick. And still only 2 crashes. Maybe it takes a couple seconds. All right, I'm gonna reload again. Hopefully it works. All right, so it looks like we got 5 crashes on this one, so it must have worked. And so if I go to the data tab now, I can see that this user ID is ABC. And looks like some of the older ones don't have that user ID. The newer ones do now, and this is going to be super helpful when we go to debug. All right. Another thing that we can do is set up some keys here. So we have this keys tab, and you'll notice that these are the default keys, but we can also add our own keys to this. And so a key is kind of just like a value that you might want to affiliate with maybe the user or the user's setting. So you might want to do a key of the user is premium or something along those lines. You're going to do logs in a second. Logs are generally more like analytics, like user opened screen, user clicked button, user did this. And so you could see the steps prior to the crash. Whereas keys are more like user properties. So it's like the user is premium, or the user is in their 5th session on the app, or user is in some A/B test or something like that. But let's go ahead and add some custom keys for now. And so let's just do users premium, because I think it's a good example. So we're going to create a function in our crash manager. We're going to say func maybe set value. I think set value is good. Value of type string for key of type string. It's kind of just, this works kind of just like a user defaults, right? So we add in a key and a value. So we're going to call Crashlytics set custom value. And we're going to pass in the value, or we're going to pass in the key. And so we're going to call this from our code here. So let's just say maybe on up here, we set crash manager shared set value for key. The value, let's say true for key, maybe user is premium. Again, I like to use lowercase snake case when doing these. You don't have to, but why not? It is a good idea when you're using these, since they do require specific keys. You might want to actually have a function to handle kind of the values that you're going to set for your key. So for this example, we might want to create a function here saying like set is premium value. We could call this other function, which we might want to make private then, and we'll say like set value, and we'll give it, maybe we'll pass in a bool here, is premium, type bool, and the value might be is premium dot description and dot maybe lowercase, and the key is user is premium. So this way in our app, we don't have to type this twice, and we can always make sure that we're setting it correctly. So if we call it from different screens or something, we can say set is premium. Let's say true for now. We're going to test that in a second, but I don't want to keep like running the app and having to check the console. So let's add in some other stuff as well while we are here. Another thing that we can do is add logs, as I said. So the other tab is logs. So let's come into our code and let's add another function here that says func add log. Crashlytics log. And log is super simple. We literally just add a string. And so I'm just going to add in here maybe message of type string, pass that in here. And then we can very simply, so on a peer, let's say crash manager shared dot add log. And in here, I think we can actually just use like sentences. I still use like crash view appeared, but I think you can also do like crash view appeared on user's screen. I think you can do like full sentences here if you want to like really be descriptive of what's exactly happening in your app. Let's also add in some logs here. So like if before they crash, let's add in maybe, button 3 clicked or something like that. Let's do this one is button 2 clicked and button 1 clicked. Oftentimes these logs, you can literally do whatever you're doing for your analytics, right? So we haven't done analytics in this series yet, but oftentimes if this was my app, I might have an analytic when this screen appears as well as when they click this button. And so I could probably just create one function that sends logs and sends analytics at the same time. Anyway, let's test these out. I'm going to go ahead and build and run. All right, we got it here. Let's close it off from the simulator. Let's open it up manually. Do some crashes. Crash 1, click me 2, click me 3. Let's do a couple more. Okay, let's build it from Xcode again. Let's search for crash. Looks like package report with ID. Looks like maybe it did upload. Let's go back to the console here. Let's check out the Crashlytics dashboard. And it looks like they're not uploaded yet. I'm gonna wait a minute or two and reload. All right, looks like this one went from 5 to 6, so I think it worked. We're going to find out here by going into the keys section, and look at that. We can see user is premium is true on this one. So we get this key here. And this is awesome because you can start sending a bunch of values that might be important for you to help debug. All of the values and the keys and the logs you're adding here should be things that are going to help you debug the crash, because sometimes these stack traces are not as clear as this, or maybe sometimes it's happening to some users and not other users. And so these really should just be something that helps you identify what is the exact environment that this user is in that is causing the crash. So maybe only premium users on this screen get a different version of the screen than non-premium users. And so maybe that's something that's good to know when we're looking at their crash. You can also see the logs here. The logs are in time order. And that's why I was saying the logs are more for like analytics of things that happen sequentially versus the keys. We don't have a timestamp on the keys here. Another thing to note though is that the key, if we were to change the value of the key, so if we were to call this function again, like set premium value, and we set it to false, right? It's going to just override the current value and set it as this value. These keys are meant to be like specific values and not logs that are updating over time. I think we can also set the keys to nil if you ever want them to stop appearing. We're not going to do that, but logs, we can see that my basic log appeared. We can also write in a sentence here, and then we can see that button 3 clicked at this time. These are pretty cool because it also helps us look at a little timestamp of when it was happening, right? This all happened within 1 second. So maybe if the screen appeared and then it happened 10 minutes later, we would know that maybe it's a different crash and it's something that we need to account for when we're trying to debug it. And then of course, we still have our user ID here, which is awesome. The last thing I want to send you guys home with is you could also have something in your app where maybe it's not an actual crash, but you might want to log it just so that you know that it is happening and it's not supposed to be happening. And we call those non-fatal crashes. And so what I can do here is also add another function called maybe, let's say, send non-fatal. And I'm going to call Crashlytics. I'm going to call Crashlytics, record. I'm going to record an error. And we'll pass in an error here of type error. And this will record a non-fatal crash. So we should use this for things in our app where if the user gets to this point, we're going to write safe code so it doesn't actually crash the user's device, but this has a meaningfully negative impact on the user's experience. So for example, if we were trying to load a screen here and we needed to pass a string into the next screen, well, we know this is going to crash, right? So instead of doing this, we might have some sort of guard statement. We might say like guard, let my string, else return, right? And so then when we get to here, we'll know that we have my string and we can safely do whatever we need to do. But if the user gets to this point, right, and they return out of this function, they're never going to get to that next screen. And it's going to be detrimental to this user experience. And so for a case like that, I would then add a crash manager shared and add a non-fatal crash. We don't have an error here, so I'm just going to use a URL error. And I'm just going to call maybe, what do we want to say? No data not allowed. Sure. All right, so let's build and run this again. All right, let's close out the Xcode debugger and let's cause some crashes. And you'll notice now that we have this number 1. Every time I click it, it's actually not crashing my app. So that's a better user experience than the crash. But of course, the user is still stuck, which is not great, right? So let's just do another crash here as well. And let's build and run it back to the simulator. Let's check if the packaged reports came through the console here. It looks like it packaged a report. And then let's go back to the Firebase Crashlytics console and go back to the home screen. And so now this is a non-fatal crash, so it should come in separately from the crash that we were seeing. Let me give it a second here. It doesn't look like it's coming through yet. So we can see here that these are crashes, right? We see the red X. But if I reload the console real quick, we will see a non-fatal crash coming through, which is awesome. And we can see here, looks like it's not fully loaded yet. Give it a second. And we can see here that it is a NSURL error, which is the exact error that I had. And so this is actually a good case of where, so the Firebase console is trying to read our debug log. And it looks like there are some missing UIDs. So there's some problem with the dSYM right now. Maybe these will get backfilled over time when it gets more logs. But we can see here, it thinks that this is the crash right here in Firebase Crashlytics SDK, right? So clearly it's not. But we can come in here and we can see that somewhere down this stack trace, we have crash view line 51. So it's not always perfect from Firebase, but it's good enough that we can figure out generally where the crash is coming from most of the time. And this is awesome now because we can see which ones are fatal and not fatal, right? So non-fatals we can worry, I guess, a little less about. And so, of course, after we get these crashes, we then want to go and start debugging the crashes and try to figure out and fix them. And so the first step I usually do is click on this, and then we have this awesome notes section here, which I think is definitely underrated. This is where you can leave notes for other developers. So if this crash has been around for a while and maybe you've done some research on it, you can add notes in here. Oftentimes I will literally go through Stack Overflow posts and try to read about it, but maybe I don't have time to actually fix and debug it right now. And so I'll go and add like links to whatever it is and say like, this might be X. And I'll go ahead and add a note. And it's awesome because Firebase is going to save that for us. So now our other developers can see that, oh, there's a note in this crash. And so when some other developer goes in, they can start reading the notes. They can see who posted it and add notes themselves as well. Another thing that we can do is either close or mute the crash. So generally I never use muting. Mute is basically the crash is still happening, but we just don't care about it. So we're going to hide it from the console. I think that's a very dangerous approach. What we usually do though is close the crash. So once you go ahead and fix it and you can confirm that it is fixed, you put out a new build, you can go ahead and close the crash. And it says issue closed, regressions in the future will reappear basically. And so when I go back to the console, this crash is now gone from my starting state because we filter on open. If I change it to close muted, obviously we're going to see the ones that were closed. I closed the previous one before without you guys seeing it. We're going to go and we're going to see the ones that are closed. So this is the one that we just closed right now. I'll go back to open. And so what we told Crashlytics is that we closed this in version 1.0 where it was crashing, it was fixed. And Crashlytics is going to confirm that. And so if we go into our app and we go to the project navigator and we actually increment the build. So I can say here, go to the general tab. And so every time you push to the App Store, you have to increment your version number. And so let's say version 1.1 is the next version that we are going to release, right? And I will build and run this. All right. And let's close it from the Xcode simulator. Let's open it up again and let's cause those crashes. I think Click Me 3 was the one that we just closed, but let's do let's do 2 and 3. And hopefully one of them is the one that we just closed. So now these are all happening on version 1.1 of my app, not 1.0. Build and run it through Xcode again. Let's make sure that the package report went through. Looks like it did. And let's go back to our Firebase console. All right, so that issue is gone right now, but I'm going to refresh and boom, look at that. It reappeared. It literally gave us an indicator that it is a regressed issue. This issue was closed on January 24th, and then it was reopened because it's occurring again in version 1.1. So this is really powerful stuff because there are many times where developers will say the issue is fixed and it's closed and it's not happening anymore. And then you can close out of your console, but if it's still happening, it's still happening. And Firebase is going to let us know literally with a nice, cool little pop-up here. These fresh issues are also pretty important because when you put out new builds, sometimes you want to be able to differentiate the issues that have been around for a while versus the issues that are new from maybe your new feature. So we can see that. I think we can also even filter on these so we can see happening early. So we don't have any early ones. Early means within 5 seconds of the user opening the app. So you open the app and then boom, it crashes immediately. Some of these probably are early or we're close to early. I'm not sure why it's not saying early, but I've seen these in the app. And oftentimes it has to do with like your app delegate or something in like the first starting couple files of your app. Maybe you have some singleton that's initializing wrong. Fresh means recent. Regressed means you closed it and it's coming back. And then repetitive means it's happening to the same user multiple times. So there are some crashes that every user will experience maybe once. And then there are some crashes where a specific user might be continually trying to do the same thing and they keep crashing. And so repetitive ones are oftentimes higher priority fix because someone is sitting on your app actually continually crashing, and that's going to be really aggravating. Whereas many of the other crashes might only happen to a user one time over 2 weeks, and that's way less annoying than a repetitive crash. Cool. And the last few things I want to leave you guys with before we wrap up is this is going to be one of the most important charts in your app. We can't see it right now, but this is your crash free rate. So once you hit that 99.9% crash free, take a screenshot because that's awesome. And that's what's going to appear right here. You're going to be able to see in very bold numbers your crash free rate. We can also come in here and search by user ID. So I think you need the exact user ID when you do this. We can see this user now has all of these crashes, which is really helpful, right? Because if a user emails in and we get their user ID, we can try to figure out which ones are actually happening to them. You can also come in here and manage some of your settings. I think the default are probably fine. And up here, if you had multiple apps, like an Android app and an iOS app, they would be listed here. And they would have different Crashlytics dashboards. So the crashes right here are for this app specific, and each app's going to have their own dashboard. And that's great because your iOS engineers don't need to worry about the Android crashes and vice versa. We can also see here the latest release. This is one of my favorite features of Firebase. The latest release is a deep dive dashboard specifically on the most recent version that it is seeing. And so this is a dashboard. This is a real-time dashboard of what's happening in your app. So we just released version 1.0. The release version, it basically is trying to find the most recent version that it's getting reports for. So obviously we didn't release this, but it's trying to figure out what it is. And it says successful because the crash free rate's pretty high right now. It's obviously not 100%. So maybe there's some delay here, or maybe just some discrepancy because we're in like a debug. But we can see, but you have this little chart here where you can see the actual users per minute. So if we were in production, we would actually see a bunch of users and how many users were here. And we can see down here a couple important things. So percentage of active users, this is going to be your percentage of active users that are on this build. So if I release 1.0, it should go up to 100% of users. And then if I release 2.0, it's going to tell me what percentage of the users have gotten 2.0 so far. Because when you release, it updates on users' devices over time. And you'll see that on this chart here. So in this chart, there's only one blue line here, but if you had 2 releases, there would be 2 lines and you'd be able to see the exact percentage of users on each one over time. Same thing here is pretty important. Crashes per 10,000 sessions. This is your crash free rate per release. So if you do one release that's got 100% crash free and the next release has 80%, well, then you probably need to view the crash details and go ahead and start debugging. Cool. Last and final thing I want to leave you guys with is early in this video, we added a script to automatically upload dSYMS to Firebase, and that's perfect. But sometimes you either don't want to do that, or maybe you forgot to do that and you've already released your build. So we can also manually upload dSYMS to the Firebase console. And we're going to do that real quick right now. If you were sending this project to the App Store, you would switch this to any device. Then you would go up to product and you would archive. And when you archive, we're not using Xcode Cloud, so I'm going to dismiss. When you archive, it basically does a build. And at the end of the archive, it will appear in your organizer like this. This is from a previous archive that I've done. And then so in order to upload to the App Store, you click Distribute App, App Store Connect, go through the questions, and you send it to App Store Connect. But from here, we can also download any debug symbols that are not in the archive, which I don't think we have any that are not in the archive. Then we can right-click Show in Finder, right-click the build and show package contents. And then we can see our dSYM file in there that was created when we did the archive. And so we can just simply compress this to a file that we can then upload to. I think it takes a second. And then in the Firebase console, I can come over here, go to my dSYMS tab, and then we can literally just drag and drop it. So I'm going to take the compressed file here, drag and drop, and it takes a quick second. And then I think it takes a couple of minutes after finish uploading before the crashes come through the dashboard. But it's that simple to manually upload dSYMS as well. So if you don't want to write that script or you forgot to, now you know how to manually upload as well. And this is so convenient, guys. You don't understand how difficult it used to be. There's some code here to actually find your dSYM and write a script using, I guess, the terminal, but drag and drop, super convenient, super fast. I love it. Thank you, Firebase, for this feature. And that is it for this video. You guys are now Crashlytics experts. This is incredibly important because so many projects Whether or not you're using Firebase as a backend, so many projects use Crashlytics for crash monitoring, and becoming an expert at Crashlytics is a skill in itself, and you can now say that you are an expert. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.